First, it was Venezuela, then Iran. Now, all eyes are on Cuba to see what Donald Trump is planning next. And all the signs seem to point in one direction. A familiar playbook used just a few months ago in Venezuela. As military assets enter the Caribbean, the CIA is on the ground. The indictment of a head of state in this case, the former Cuban president, Raul Castro, widely regarded as still the most powerful leader in the island nation. Cuba's ambassador to the United Nations suggested all of this is Donald Trump creating a pretext for the U.S. to attack Cuba. Quote, "I cannot call it another word than a circus they are now mounting as one more action to justify military aggression against Cuba." Secretary of State Marco Rubio is now directly calling Cuba a national security threat.
Cuba has always posed a national security threat to the United States. They, by the way, have been one of the leading sponsors of terrorism in the entire region. If there's a threat to the national security of the United States, the president not just has the right, he has the obligation to address that national security threat.
A day earlier, Marco Rubio released a direct Spanish-language appeal to the Cuban people that, quote, Trump is offering a new path between the U.S. and a new Cuba. It's not clear how many Cubans actually heard it, though, as millions there scramble to afford food and supplies. They're getting by with only 1 to 2 hours a day of electricity and often have no access to the internet. The New York Times reports Cuba is facing a moment of rising crisis as the country's oil supplies for domestic use and power plants have been exhausted after Mr. Trump effectively imposed a blockade on fuel shipments from any country. On Wednesday, the aircraft carrier Nimitz and its escort warships entered the southern Caribbean Sea, where it is expected to remain for at least a few days. Earlier this week, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel said any U.S. military action against Cuba would lead to a, quote, bloodbath with incalculable consequences, plus the destructive impact on regional peace and stability. Cuba poses no threat, nor does it have aggressive plans or intentions against any country, he said. Donald Trump made the calculation that Iran would go the way Venezuela did, and it didn't. And as the Wall Street Journal reports, it's unlikely things would play out that way in Cuba, too. Trump officials have cited Maduro's capture as a blueprint for Cuban regime change. U.S. officials have been searching for Cuban government insiders in the hope that they can cut a deal to help push out the Castro-led government. But many observers say that Venezuela isn't Cuba, and what the U.S. calls success in Caracas may be a lot harder to replicate in Havana. Joining us now is Lisandro Perez, professor and chair of the Department of Latin American Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Lisandro, it is great to see you again. I want to start right where I left off there, and why you think an operation against Cuba might not be as straightforward and as simple as what Trump pulled off in Venezuela.
Well, I think there's several factors there. I think one is Cuban security is actually pretty good. They've taught other countries, about their own security. So I think they're keeping Raul Castro very secure at this time, and they might pose a bigger strategic obstacle than Venezuela did. I think, another reason is that there's a great deal of solidarity, I think, within the Cuban ranks. This is not a case of different sort of sectors within the government. Raul Castro, who's the real power now in Cuba, is an individual who personally led the armed forces. And the top generals and the military establishment is personally loyal to him. So I think it's not a case where we might expect that Cuba, or the Cuban leadership, I should say, will crack with simply the abduction of Raul Castro.
What do you think that abduction, if it were to happen, really would symbolize here? I mean, he is 94 years old. And of course, there are many Cuban Americans who have wanted him to face the consequences for a long time. But the reality of capturing a 94-year-old, having him stand trial in the United States, I mean, it's sort of difficult to imagine. And that's before you even get into just assessing the quality of the United States claims against the former president there. For you, I guess I want both your personal take as a Cuban American, but then also your assessment here of whether it's part of a real strategic doctrine or if it's really just a sort of South Florida, almost cultural favor to do something like this.
Yeah, I think that would have a very symbolic sort of impact on Cuba, not a real one. Perhaps I don't think that it will mean, for example, that the Cuban regime will in any way crumble or make it easier for there to be a regime change in Cuba. But at the same time, I think, you've got to consider that Raúl Castro is one of the historic leaders of the revolution. And there may be a lot of people who want change in Cuba. I think everyone wants change in Cuba. Everyone wants to see the conditions change in Cuba. But it's quite another thing, right, to present Cubans with an external threat. Many of the individuals or sectors of Cuba who may still be loyal to the revolution will, of course, rally behind this. There was a rally, of course, today in Havana in support of Raúl Castro, and I think that in many ways that nothing it tends to promote solidarity more than an external threat. Look at Iran, for example. There were demonstrations against the government, massive demonstrations against the government. Since the war with Iran, there hasn't been any, in part because it gives the government in power the ability to crack down. But also it means that people who might be soft on support for the government might say, well, we'd like change, but we don't like this change. So I think the posing of an external threat plays a great deal into the hands of the Cuban leadership. And it's always been that case. They have a long history of dealing with external threats by the U.S. Will they be able to survive this one? We'll see. But in many ways, right, the external threat is something that helps them to try to rally support.
Absolutely. And on the island, the New York Times reported that one 70-year-old Cuban retiree said whatever the U.S.'s decision, they should just hurry up and take it. If they're going to do it, they should come in. And if not, they should stop talking so much. Lisandro Perez, it's great to see you. And thank you.